Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. If you've been listening to my show before, you know I talk a great deal about enlisting professionals to help you with your taxes. And one of the questions I got the other day from a client, prospective client that called says, hey Ralph, how come I shouldn't just do my own tax return? And I said, you know what? I really need to have a good answer for that. And I was looking around and I found this article that was written by Wendy Connick from the Motley Fool. It was published on February 18th, 2018. And she mentions in here, 4 signs that you shouldn't do your own tax return. And I think these are excellent. And I thought we'd spend a few minutes and go through these. You'll save more money on your tax bill if you end up paying for expert advice. And that's what she mentions here. And I have to agree with that. That is definitely true. And the first one of those things is if you've had a major life change, such as having a baby, getting married. These are all events that have a big impact on your taxes. When you've gone through such a major change, a good idea to have a pro to your next return. And I'll tell you, I do see these sometimes. A client will come in and say, we just had a baby, or, we just got married, because there's so many people that don't understand the nuances that go along with that. For example, if you've had a new baby, there are tax breaks for having a child. There's child tax credits. There's dependent care credits. There's a whole host of things, but you might not know those because, first of all, it may be your first baby and you're used to just doing a simple, 1040, or even if you're single, maybe a 1040 EZ, but now you've gotten married, you have children, things have gotten a lot more complicated. And there may be thousands of dollars left on the table that you're not being able to take advantage of because you're not aware of these things. So I definitely recommend that if you've had a major life change, that could also be you've lost a spouse, or you've gotten divorced. All these things are going to impact your taxes. Number 2, and then we get a lot of clients in this regard, and that is you own a rental property. And this is a big area for where people try to do it themselves to save a few bucks, but they end up costing themselves money. I have a client that I picked up, about a month ago, had been doing his taxes himself on TurboTax, and he actually had 2 rental properties. And he just was not grasping the idea of how to account for these rental properties. And he really had 2 issues. Issue number 1 is he failed to take depreciation expense on the rental properties, which is something he was entitled to take. But the bigger issue was he was missing out on the passive activity loss limitation. And I don't want to get lost in the weeds with this because this is a complicated discussion. But if you make over a certain amount of money, the IRS code allows you only so much that you can take in losses. So there are other things that you can do to shift around those expenses or figure out better ways to handle that. And, if you've got rental properties, that's a whole entire tax code area that, I've done other shows on this. And there's a great deal of areas in here where, it can get really messy, especially if you spend any time living in that rental property during the year. If you've suffered any losses or it was destroyed by a fire, you definitely want to do yourself a favor and let a tax pro look at this. This Schedule E can be complicated. So it's important to take a look at that, and a tax preparer or a tax professional is going to also give you guidance on how to keep track of these things as you go. Number 3 they mention here is you started a side gig. And I always think this is funny. I hear the term side hustle or side gig. And starting your own business is complicated. And there's a lot of things that you might not understand because you've never done this before. You've always worked for somebody else that's given you a W-2 at the end of the year. And whether your business is a success or failure, there's a lot of extra things that you need to do and you need to be keeping track of. And I will tell you, in most cases, when I see a new client that comes in that has done their own taxes for a business, they're coming in because they're frustrated. They just don't understand, how they can owe so much, or what are the expenses they're able to take, and these things are complicated, and they're not as simple as just, let me log into TurboTax and see what I can do to put this tax return together, because there's a whole host of things. For example, it mentions in here, for example, driving your personal car to meet with clients, pick up business supplies, or do any business related activity means you can claim a business mileage reimbursement. But the thing that people don't understand is you can't just make that up. You need to have a mileage log. And I always, people are bewildered when I say that to them. What do you mean I need a mileage log? I said, well, basically you need to have some sort of mileage log. Now, there are a host of applications that you can get for your smartphones that handle these things. But again, if you don't get started early and get these records in place, you're not going to know what you need to have to put together. And especially your first year of operation. I talked about this in another show where you need to have a business savvy tax accountant that really understands, the different forms of business, how to protect your liability, how to reduce your cost, how to make sure that you're not paying too much tax, and how to make sure you're keeping the records that you need to keep to make sure that you have all the documents you need at tax time. One of the things you don't want to see is, maybe you get a 1099 for some miscellaneous income, but you have not kept any receipts of what you're going to deduct against that. I mean, one of the big things I see all the time is I'll say to somebody, what are your receipts? Why didn't you really keep track of that? Where did you go? Why didn't you really keep track of mileage? Well, I guess I drove about 12,000 miles, but that's not going to be good enough. So you really need to pay attention to these things and enlist the support of a good tax accountant before you get started. Now, the final thing they mention here is if you failed to file returns in the past. And I will tell you from experience, this happens more often than people think. It's not unheard of for tax preparers or for taxpayers not to file taxes for several years. And it's a lot of times they expect this huge tax bill. Now, failing to file returns will result in you getting into big trouble with the IRS. That's the truth. But if you're not filing returns, and you're not paying them, at least, to come into compliance would be better. I say to clients all the time, not filing returns is tax evasion. Not paying for your taxes, to pay the taxes you owe is a civil issue. You don't want to go to jail because you haven't filed your tax returns. I always say to clients, listen, the best thing to do is file the returns. If you owe money, the IRS is in a position where they want to collect the money. They're not going to come after you if you're filing. If you're filing the returns and making sure you've got all your ducks in a row. The failure to file penalty, what most people don't realize, is 25% of the amount due. And you can avoid that if you just go ahead and prepare the returns or have someone prepare those returns so that you don't find yourself in that, non-filing position. And a pro like myself can help you prepare those missing returns and they know how to deal with the IRS hassles that go along with that. A lot of times clients will say, I don't remember the last time I did file. So a tax professional can help you go and get what's called an IRS transcript, and they can pull that information and see, when was the last time you filed? What are the documents that the IRS has that have been reported, with your Social Security number on them? And that's where it will become invaluable. And then once you get all those tax returns filed, a true accounting professional will help you work with the IRS to come up with a payment plan or maybe an offer in compromise. I talked about these before in my show, but the key is to be filing those things. So just to reiterate what we talked about today, is what are the 4 things are sure signs you shouldn't do your own taxes? And then that's if you've had a major life change, own a rental property, started a side gig or a small business, or failed to file returns in the past. All of these things are signs that you need to get help. And as I've said before, you want to definitely make sure that you get help, with a tax professional who understands, what you're looking into. So I hope this was really helpful.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.